I spoke to a lawyer today. 4 words, that's all it took. 4 words, spoken across a quiet kitchen table by a woman I'd loved for 12 years. And in that moment, I realized I was the one who had put those words in her mouth. I want you to remember a folder, closed, sitting between us. Like something neither of us could climb over, because everything I'm about to tell you leads to that folder. And by the time we get there, you'll understand exactly how a man can lose everything without anyone ever doing a single thing wrong. 3 weeks earlier, I finally learned the truth, and by then, it didn't matter anymore. Because the truth doesn't erase 3 weeks of silence. It doesn't erase the way I looked at my own wife, like she was a stranger, wearing a familiar face. By the time I finally got my answer, I'd already destroyed the question. Stay with me, because the twist in this story isn't who you think it is. There isn't a villain, no secret affair, no master plan, just a photograph, a marriage, and one man who chose silence at the exact moment. One honest question could have changed everything. If stories like this stay with you after they're over, take a second and subscribe, because trust me, you don't want to miss what happens at that kitchen table. And while you're here, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every single one. Now, let's go back to the beginning. My name is Daniel. I was married to Claire for 12 years. 12 years, that's 4,380 mornings. 4,380 chances to wake up beside the same woman and quietly choose to trust her all over again. I used to believe that was the real secret to a happy marriage. Not a grand promise made once at an altar, but a choice you remake every single morning, quietly, without applause, without anyone watching. And somehow, that's what made it beautiful. I was proud of that. I built my whole identity around it. I was the guy who didn't get jealous, the guy who never checked phones, who never demanded explanations, who trusted his wife the same way you trust gravity, without thinking about it, without questioning it, without imagining it could ever fail. I want you to remember that version of me. Hold on to him, because over the next few minutes, you're going to watch him disappear. Around that time, a new guy started at my firm. His name was Raj, soft-spoken, easygoing, transferred from our Seattle office. He joined the accounting department. Honestly, I liked him immediately. We had the same terrible sense of humor, the kind that made everyone else roll their eyes. We became friends over something completely ordinary. The office espresso machine. It had been broken longer than Raj had even worked there. Everybody complained about it. Nobody ever fixed it. Funny how friendships begin over things that don't seem important. Small conversations, shared frustrations, tiny moments. That's usually how real friendships start, not with dramatic introductions, just life happening. I want you to like Raj too, really like him, because that's important. There are no warning signs, no suspicious behavior, no secret phone calls, no strange glances, no red flags, just a decent man, a broken espresso machine, and 2 coworkers becoming friends. Everything felt completely normal until one Tuesday, one ordinary Tuesday, that lasted about 30 seconds and somehow destroyed everything. It was a Tuesday, an ordinary Tuesday. Raj and I walked to the little cafe just down the street from the office. Nothing unusual, nothing memorable. We were standing in line, talking about work, talking about nothing. The kind of conversation you forget. 5 minutes later, Raj reached into his pocket to pay for his coffee, and then something slipped free. It fell right between us. At first, I thought it was a credit card. I bent down before he even realized he'd dropped it. But it wasn't a card. It was a photograph. Old, worn, the edges soft from years of being folded and unfolded. So many times, it barely felt like paper anymore. It felt like something precious, something someone couldn't let go of. I turned it over, and my entire world stopped. It was Claire. My wife, much younger, maybe 20 years old. She was laughing, looking at someone outside the frame. Sunlight rested gently across the side of her face. There wasn't the slightest doubt. It was her. The woman I'd shared 12 years with was staring back at me from another man's wallet. Raj reached over, smiled, and said, "Hey, thanks. That's all." No panic, no explanation. He slipped the photograph back into his wallet as casually as someone putting away a receipt, like it meant nothing. Meanwhile, every thought in my head collapsed. Every certainty began falling apart. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I couldn't even ask the one question that could have changed everything. Instead, I handed the wallet back, mumbled something about needing to make a phone call, turned around, and walked out without my coffee, without my appetite, without my composure, and without asking a single question. That was the first mistake. It wouldn't be the last. I didn't confront Raj. I didn't confront Claire. Looking back, I wish I had, because what I chose instead was quieter and somehow far more destructive. I decided to watch instead of ask. At the time, I convinced myself I was being smart. Stay calm, don't overreact, gather the facts. Make sure you know the truth before you say anything. That's what I told myself, but it wasn't the truth. The truth was, I'd already made my decision. I had already reached a verdict. Everything after that was just me looking for evidence to prove I was right. That night, I didn't sleep. Claire was lying beside me, peacefully, breathing softly, completely unaware that the man beside her had already begun putting her on trial. I stared at the ceiling, again and again. That photograph replayed in my mind. Her smile, Raj's wallet, the way he slipped it back inside, without a second thought. And once I started looking, I found reasons everywhere. Claire had traveled to Seattle for a conference 2 years earlier. Raj had just transferred from Seattle. Coincidence? At the time, I didn't think so. Then I remembered something else. Months earlier, Claire had mentioned someone from a past life. She'd smiled, then changed the subject. Back then, it hadn't meant anything. Now, it meant everything. Or at least, I convinced myself it did. By sunrise, I'd built an entire story, an entire history, out of silence, out of fear, out of assumptions. And not one piece of it had been confirmed. I never asked her, not once. Instead, I started changing. Little by little, I answered her with fewer words. I stopped reaching for her hand when we drove together. Dinner became quiet. Our conversations became shorter. Sometimes, I'd catch myself watching her, not as my wife, but as someone I was trying to figure out, someone I no longer believed I truly knew. Claire noticed. Of course she noticed. She always noticed. One evening, she stood quietly in the kitchen doorway, a dish towel still folded in her hands. She looked at me, then she asked, "Did I do something?" I looked straight at her, and I lied. "No, I'm just tired." She searched my face. For a moment, I thought she already knew, but she didn't argue. She simply nodded and walked away, still hoping the silence would heal itself. It didn't. Silence never heals. It only grows, day after day, week after week, until one day, you can't remember what life sounded like before it arrived. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks of living beside the woman I loved while treating her like a stranger, and she never knew why. There was one night, about halfway through those 3 weeks, when I almost told her. Claire was in our bedroom, folding laundry on the bed. Nothing dramatic, nothing unusual, just an ordinary night. Soft light from the bedside lamp, clean clothes in small piles, the quiet sound of fabric being folded, and me standing in the doorway with the truth right at the edge of my mouth. The photograph, the wallet, Raj's name, everything. For 1 second, I was going to say it. I really was. I opened my mouth, and then I stopped, because another thought came first. What if I'm wrong? What if I say it and it changes the way she looks at me? What if I accuse her and there's no way to take it back? Then came the second thought, the worse one. What if I'm right? What if I ask the question and the answer destroys me? So I stood there, frozen, holding a question. That could have saved us. And instead of asking it, I said, "Need help with that?" Claire looked up, tired, soft, still trying, and she gave me a small smile. "Sure." So I walked over, picked up a shirt, folded it badly. She corrected the sleeve, the way she always did. A tiny thing, a familiar thing, something married people do, without thinking. And somehow, that made it worse, because the woman beside me was still my wife, still there, still close enough to touch, and I still chose not to reach her. We folded laundry together, in the same room, on the same bed, breathing the same air. But emotionally, I had already moved somewhere else. I let the moment pass. I let it close over us, like water. That was the second mistake, worse than the first, because by then, I knew better. By then, I had already felt what silence was doing to us, and I chose it anyway. Then, of all people, it was Raj who finally broke the silence. We were working late, just the two of us. The office was almost empty. Most of the lights had already gone out. The only sound was the steady tapping of keyboards and the soft hum of the air conditioning. Neither of us said much, until Raj looked up and smiled to himself. "You know," he said quietly, "I've been thinking about someone lately." I looked over. He leaned back in his chair, almost laughing at himself. "There was this girl, back in college. We were best friends. Nothing romantic. Just one of those rare people who made you feel like you never had to pretend." I felt my chest tighten. He kept talking. "I lost touch with her after I moved away for grad school. I've looked for her a few times, but never found her." Then he smiled. The kind of smile people have when they're remembering. A genuinely good person. "I still carry a photo of her." He laughed softly. "Sounds ridiculous, doesn't it?" My heart stopped. I already knew, or at least I thought I did. I swallowed hard, then asked, as calmly as I could, "What was her name?" Raj didn't hesitate. "Claire." Just one word. "Claire." Then he smiled again. "Claire Ainsley. That was her name back then. Her maiden name." The room seemed to disappear. Everything suddenly made sense. The conference, Seattle, the old photograph, the friend from a past life, not a secret lover, not an affair, not a betrayal, just an old friendship that had survived inside a worn photograph. I sat there, unable to move, unable to breathe. 3 weeks. I'd spent 3 weeks punishing the woman I loved for something that had never happened. I finally looked at Raj. My voice barely worked. "Claire is my wife." His face changed instantly. Confusion, shock, then guilt. "Oh my God," he whispered. He apologized, again, and again, and again. Not because he'd done anything wrong, but because he realized what that photograph must have looked like. He explained everything: how they met in college, how they studied together, how they ate terrible cafeteria pizza after late-night exams, how she encouraged him when he almost dropped out, how life simply pulled them in different directions. Nothing more, nothing less. No hidden romance, no secret relationship. Just 2 young friends who never got the chance to say goodbye. I had built 3 weeks of fear on top of a coincidence. I left the office that night feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because Claire had never betrayed me. Heavier because I finally understood who had. It wasn't Raj. It wasn't Claire. It was me. For the first time in 3 weeks, I wasn't driving home to confront my wife. I was driving home to beg for her forgiveness. And for the first time, I truly believed I could still fix everything. I had no idea. I was already too late. I drove home, rehearsing an apology, not an accusation. For the first time in 3 weeks, I finally knew the truth, and I believed, with everything I had, that I could still fix this. The whole drive home, I kept repeating the same words. Claire, I'm sorry, I should have asked. I was wrong. I honestly believed those words would be enough. When I pulled into the driveway, everything looked normal. The porch light was on, the living room curtains were open. Nothing looked different. Nothing warned me so that everything already had. I opened the front door. The house was quiet, too quiet. Then I saw her, Claire, sitting at the kitchen table. A folder rested in front of her, closed. She slowly looked up. There were no tears, no shouting, no anger. Somehow, that frightened me, more than any scream ever could. She took a slow breath. Then she said, I spoke to a lawyer today. 4 words, just 4 words, and every hope I'd carried home with me collapsed. Claire, I whispered. She looked at me quietly, then spoke. I don't know what's happened to you, but for 3 weeks, you've looked at me like I'd done something wrong, like I was guilty of something I didn't even understand. You never asked me, not once. You never came to me and simply said, Claire, can we talk? There's something that's been bothering me. Can you help me understand? You made your decision, and every day I could feel it. You were living beside me, but you weren't with me anymore. I felt my throat tighten. The words came rushing out. I was wrong. I know that now. It was Raj, the photograph. It wasn't what I thought. He told me everything. Claire frowned. Wait, Raj? You mean Raj Thompson from college? The friend I told you about years ago? I nodded. She stared at me, completely stunned. Wait, you actually met Raj? Where? He works with me. He transferred from our Seattle office. She blinked. Oh my goodness. I can't believe that. I've wondered, for years, whatever happened to him. Then, the surprise slowly faded. I watched it happen, right there, in her eyes, like someone finally finding the missing piece. She looked back at me, her voice barely above a whisper. So, it was Raj. A long pause, then her eyes widened again. Oh, Daniel, it was because you saw that photograph, wasn't it? That you've been treating me like this? I couldn't answer. I didn't have to. The silence answered for me. She lowered her eyes, took a slow breath, then looked back at me. You know, what's hurting me the most? Silence. I couldn't speak. She waited, just long enough for me to understand that whatever she said next would stay with me for the rest of my life. Then, very quietly, she said, It isn't that you believed. The wrong thing. Silence. Long enough to feel the weight of those words. Then, almost in a whisper, It's that you believed it. Without believing, me first. Those words didn't just hit me, they shattered everything. Every excuse, every explanation, every apology simply disappeared. I'll fix this. I swear, I'll fix it. I'll do anything. She gave me the smallest nod. I know you're sorry. I really do. But sorry doesn't give me back. The last 3 weeks, it doesn't erase the way you looked at me. It doesn't erase how lonely I felt, living beside the one person who was supposed to know me better than anyone else. A single tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't even notice it. She simply looked into my eyes, one last time. You didn't lose me because you doubted me. A long silence. Then, very softly, you lost me because you never trusted me enough to ask. Silence. Not the silence of 2 people with nothing left to say. The silence of 2 people who both knew there was nothing left to say that could be said. I sat down, slowly. The folder never moved. It stayed there, between us, like a wall. Neither of us knew how to climb anymore. Outside, it had started to rain, softly. The kind of rain you barely notice, until everything around you is already soaked. I couldn't stop thinking about one thing. Not the photograph, not Raj, not even the lawyer. one question kept repeating itself. Why didn't I just ask? One question, one conversation, one moment of courage. That was all it would have taken. Instead, I chose silence, and silence made every decision for me. I used to believe trust meant never asking questions. Now I understand trust isn't the absence of questions. Trust is believing someone deserves the chance to answer them. By the time the truth found me, there was nowhere left for it to land. I had never been a jealous man. I'd simply never been tested. And when life finally tested me, I failed. Not because I believed the wrong thing, but because I chose fear instead of trust. I chose silence instead of love. And by the time I chose differently, there was nothing left to choose. So let me ask you something. If you had been standing where I stood, would you have asked? Or would you have watched, quietly, convincing yourself that silence was the smarter choice? Take a moment, think about it, because sometimes the biggest decisions are the ones we never realize we're making. If this story stayed with you, tell me why in the comments. I read every one. And if stories about ordinary choices with extraordinary consequences are the kind of stories you love, I'd be honored to have you here. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next story.